Well, David and Carrie, we just wrapped up a series on what it really takes to reach young families. And as a parent, I don't think churches can ever overemphasize enough how important it is to keep our kids safe and secure. And I know, Dave, you wrote a book a few years ago on a system to prevent abuse risk in churches. What led you to write that book?
Yeah, the publisher of the book, Strang, one of their guys came to me, and right about the time, this is a long time ago, but right about the time that the first wave of child abuse, priest pedophile, they were calling it the priest pedophile crisis, was hitting the news, they came to me and said, "Look, we need to publish something. We want to help the churches," and so that's kind of what triggered us looking into it to see if we couldn't take a large body of information and try to simplify it. And so in my book, we called it STOP, STOP, Screen, Train, Operate, Plan. Unfortunately, it's a misnomer because you can't stop it. You can do everything you can to prevent it, but there's no system that's fail-safe that would allow somebody to implement a system and just have security that it's never going to happen. You have to be ever vigilant, and you have to just get the entire organization exercising these efforts to protect them from child abuse.
Yeah. What are, in your point of view, what are a few of the absolute just best practices that every church should have in place when it comes to kids' safety specifically?
Well, I think the number one thing, and Carrie, you jump in at any moment, because Carrie, I'm old enough now that I don't have to create a bunch of documents. I just get to talk about it. Carrie gets down and really deploys some of these policies and procedures.
Yeah.
To your question, I don't think it's as big an issue as it used to be early on, but I can remember very clearly when we rolled this out, when we started talking about screening employees and volunteers, people's reaction would be, well, first of all, how much is that going to cost? To their credit, that was way beyond and before we had the technology that we have now that's really reduced the cost associated with it. But short answer, I think the absolute minimum thing that a church or ministry should be doing is you got to screen. And when you screen, there's a whole process there. It's not merely just getting some report back, but you've got screening of employees, of volunteers. You've got employees and volunteers that have primary access to kids. You're going to do other things there. I mean, then you move over into policies, procedures, and operational training, et cetera. So there's a lot to be done. But if you ask me, and I'll interested in what Carrie says, but if you ask me, the one absolute non-negotiable is you've got to be doing screening to see if somebody has a conviction and it's not just child abuse. I mean, you want to look and screen for crime, what we call in Texas, crimes against the person. It could be assault. It could be all kinds of things, not necessarily related, but once you get that information, you have to be prepared to deal with it. So Carrie, what say ye?
I agree. That's the first step in the process. And you want to even have them complete applications as if they're an employee, applying for a job, because you want that information. You want to go through the screening process. You want to have references even if it's from another church, to touch base and compare that, because people can present well very easily on first impression. And you want to get past that to really have that security and knowing that they're the right person to be in these roles.
Yeah. And I will tell you again, there was a time where we got a lot of pushback on this, but we're like, the difference between a volunteer and an employee, there's many legal differences, but one thing is it's really hard to fire a volunteer.
Yeah.
Okay. So you need to start off with, we're not going to differentiate. We're going to have an application. We're going to have an interview. We're going to do a criminal background check. We're going to do all these things, whether they're employed by us or merely a volunteer, because at the end of the day, they're agents of the church. Mm-hmm. So negligent hiring, selection, supervision, the things that people get sued for when something bad happens, you have to deploy those policies and procedures to employees and volunteers.
Agree. On the negligent front, it's usually a failure to do something. So you want to start off by taking steps to prevent it to begin with, not just allow access freely and then catch it on the hind end where it's already a problem.
Carrie, I wonder from your perspective, are there any areas that you see churches just can be naive, things that they don't consider, or maybe assumptions that they make?
I think generally they need volunteers for one. The
Yeah.
need for volunteers is high. And then secondly, I'd say they presume their intentions are genuine and sincere, the people that are volunteering. And that's not always true.
Yeah.
So to get them on board to recognize like maybe and hopefully they are these genuine, sincere individuals, but we need to put these things in place to protect, the church entity and the children really are who
Right.
are going to benefit from this. So to get them to recognize that, yes, we hope that your belief is true in this person and who they really are. But for the benefit of everyone, we need to put these procedures in place and word them strongly. We need to not be afraid of their interpretation of you can't do this. You need to report. You need to, and that seems intimidating when the need for volunteers is high
Yeah.
as it is. You don't want to deter people. So you're afraid, perhaps churches don't want to put in strong language, but really they need to, and they need to emphasize that it's for the safety of the children.
That's good.
So getting over that hurdle.
Yeah.
If I could pick up on the naive part of this, and
Please.
we as lawyers, whatever the most recent case is that we've worked on, seems like it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I will tell you, one of the naive things that I have encountered recently in a case was, you develop these policies and procedures, and you agree that we're going to deploy these universally, exercise the universal precaution. It doesn't matter who it is. You've got to be screened. You have to be trained. You have to do. And the naive part of it as well. Yeah, but we didn't have him background check because he's the pastor's son, or he's related to so-and-so, or they've been in the church forever. And you go, don't waste time trying to decide who doesn't get screened. Don't waste time who's excluded. Just agree, we're going to do this for everybody. I don't care if it's the pastor's son or somebody that was a founder of the church. It doesn't matter. They're going to get screened. And if they get offended by it, then they need to be educated about why this is so important. Because, and most people don't know this, but if you look at the studies that indicate every year, the biggest judgments that are taken against churches in courts are child abuse cases. I mean, we as a society, it's a good thing, but we're intolerant of it. And this morning I woke up and I was reading an article, and the L.A. The diocese in L.A., the Catholic diocese, Roman Catholic diocese in L.A., it announced that they had reached a settlement with 1,400 victims of child abuse, 300 priests, and it was $1.5 billion. Well, that's not an insurance carrier paying that.
Sure.
I mean, that's go to the bank, write the check. And so that has a direct impact on their ministry. And I know a lot of things have changed since then. It's not necessarily going to be applicable to the listeners here, but it does drive home the point how serious this is.
Yeah.
I've said when I've spoken on this, and it's not a perfect word picture, but I said, if the church was a bank, the minute you walk into the nursery area, the minute you walk into the children's ministry area, you've walked into the vault.
Yeah.
The most protected area of the church should be that. The people that are the most highly trained should be in that area.
Yeah.
The fact that you just, you've been given this incredible opportunity to minister to somebody's life, you got to do everything within reason. That's a legal term, reasonable. You have to be reasonable, but you should do everything within reason to make it a safe place for kids.
Yeah. I love that, Dave. I love that word picture, and I've actually borrowed it from you many times and used it, try to give you credit for that. But I think that's such a great word picture for ministry leaders to have in mind. We've all experienced a bank, right? And we all know how hard it is, or how hard it would be if we tried to get into the vault. But we often don't think about our kids' ministry spaces in that way. So I think that's really helpful. David, you mentioned a story that you just recently read that kind of made some headlines. And it seems like the stories that make headlines often end up happening in churches that did have some policies in place or some procedures in place already to prevent abuse or other things happening. So where are the gaps between having the right policies that you've seen, the right policies in place, and then also just reliable execution of those policies?
Well, I think the spectrum is people that don't have any policies and procedures. Okay. And they're just not doing anything. They were just, let's just trust, believe, and not worry
Mm-hmm.
about this, which is not a good approach.
Right.
Let's give the hypothetical church that we're talking about, let's give them all the benefit of the doubt. They've got state of the art policies, procedures. They're doing screening. They've done training. They have operational plans in place. They know how to report. That's all great. And then they choose not to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be one example of a problem. And then the other thing, and this is the unfortunate part of it, but it should be something that motivates people, I think, is that even at the end of the day, you can do all of that and somebody can slip through. I like to think of all these policies and procedures and all the things we're talking about as filters.
Mm-hmm.
There's still, even with water filters, I can get the most sophisticated water filtration system, but at the end of the day, there's going to be some contaminants that flow through. Okay, well, man, that's a terrible outcome. It is a terrible outcome, but you have to understand what the law requires.
Mm-hmm.
The law does not require perfection. The standard is to be reasonable. When we go to law school, we spend a lot of time talking about the reasonable person. And the definition of reasonableness is what would a reasonable person do in the same or similar circumstance. In this situation, we're talking, what would the reasonable church leader do in the same or similar circumstance to do everything they can within reason to reduce the risk of that contaminant, that abuser getting through? Yeah. Because that's what you're going to explain to a jury. Sure. The law, again, doesn't require perfection. You have to be able to demonstrate that we did what we could within reason.
Yep. Carey, I wonder, how do you coach churches through the process of just getting more serious, if they haven't been in the past, about security in their kids' spaces? And maybe they come at this with more of a relaxed attitude. Maybe they've had that approach in the past. How would you coach them to take the right next steps?
I would say we start, with whatever kind of policies they have. Often it's informal, right? Mm-hmm. So we have them provide that and we can review that, and we provide input into how we think we can bolster those and the rationale behind that. This might seem like a minor change, but it really, on the legal side of the things, it bolsters your argument for meeting the standard, right? And so gradual steps that way, and if we need to meet with board members as well to really have a thorough discussion, we're willing to do that as well. But to get them to that level of, we know that this is a priority for the church, but that needs to translate into the policies that we build for it as well.
All right. Well, this conversation has been really helpful. It's helpful for churches to hear your perspective, and for churches who have maybe had a more relaxed attitude in the past, hopefully to be challenged by this and how they can not just protect their church, but also protect the kids that are so critical and important in their church. Before we wrap up the conversation, just wonder, for both of you, I'll toss this out. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave church leaders with?
Well, one thing I'm reminded of what Ronald Reagan said when he was talking about the Soviet Union. He said, we want to trust, but we're going to verify. Mm-hmm. So we always tell folks, I try to be mindful of this, is look, if you feel like we're being untrustworthy, that's not the issue. The issue is verification of somebody's ability, capability, and qualification to have access to that very thing that should be the most important thing that you're trying to protect, and that's children. And when I say children, we're talking about anybody under the age of 18.
Yeah.
Okay, so we understand it's a big deal, but it's really, really important.
Yeah.
I would just add to that they need to be vigilant. You need to get some policies and procedures in place, including the screening from the beginning, but then you need to go back and review those, right? On a minimum, an annual basis, review them, potential incidents that have occurred, and reevaluate if something should be changed, right? Mm-hmm. It's never ending. The access to them with technology and electronics, there's just so many things that you need to consider. You just got to continue to review.
And on the former background checking thing, we always encourage people, it's not a one and done deal. I mean, you got to do it annually. You have to do it on a random basis. Because a lot can happen in that amount of time. So again, we want to answer to the Lord. We want to be good stewards of all that He's got given to us to oversee. But also, we need to be mindful of that jury panel that we might be in front of and going, okay, we need to explain to you what we did, what we didn't do, and why. Yeah. And if the end of the day, if we keep our eyes on reasonableness, then I think it helps people get over the hump of this is impossible, because it's not impossible. It's just a muscle you have to exercise and get strong at doing.
Dave, Carey, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise on this. It's super helpful to church leaders. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you. Thanks for inviting us.